The red dot didn't belong there. It was small, barely a flicker against the warm gold lighting of Aurelius, Chicago's most exclusive dining room. Most people would have missed it. Most people didn't spend their childhoods learning to notice the things that didn't fit. Nora Russo wasn't most people. She had 3 tables running, a bottle of 2011 Barolo balanced in her left hand, and a mental map of every exit in the building. That was just Tuesday night. The restaurant hummed with the low, polished noise of money. Crystal glasses kissed softly together, leather chairs scraped against marble floors, and somewhere near the piano, a man laughed too hard at something that wasn't funny. Nora heard all of it without looking. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous things in a room didn't announce themselves. She was refilling water glasses at table 7 when the front door opened and the air changed. It was the only way she knew how to describe it. The air just changed. The bartender's hands went still. The maitre d' straightened his jacket without being told. The 2 men at the corner booth near the window stopped talking mid-sentence and looked down at their plates. A ripple passed through the room, quiet and fast, like the shadow of something large moving underwater. Damien Volkov walked in. He was taller than she expected. That was her first thought. Not the suit that probably cost more than her rent. Not the 2 men flanking him like walls. Not the way every server in the room suddenly found somewhere else to be. He was just tall. And still. The kind of still that didn't come from being relaxed. Came from never needing to move first. Nora set the water pitcher down and watched him cross the room. He moved through it the way a storm moved through a city. Not fast, not loud, but certain. Everything adjusted around him. His eyes swept the space once, slowly, and in that single pass she had the distinct feeling that he had already counted every person in the room and decided which ones mattered. His gaze landed on her for exactly half a second. She looked away first. Not out of fear. Out of habit. The maitre d' rushed to the reserved corner table. The best one, naturally the one with full sight lines and its back to the wall. Damien sat without waiting to be guided. His security team took positions without being told. One near the entrance. One near the kitchen. And a third one, a man Nora hadn't noticed until now, who moved to stand near the far glass panel that overlooked the street below. She was still watching when Marco, the head waiter, appeared beside her. "Table 4, he said low and tight. "You're taking it." Nora looked at him. "That's Volkov's table." "I'm aware." Marco didn't meet her eyes. "Giovanni has a family. Stefan just had a baby. You're the one without reasons." He said it like it was a compliment. She picked up her order pad. The walk to table 4 felt longer than it was. She kept her pace even, her face neutral, her hands loose. She had worked this room for 2 years. She had served politicians who had shaken hands with people they later had arrested. She had poured wine for men whose names appeared in federal indictments. She understood that Aurelius was not just a restaurant. It was a theater, and everyone inside it was performing something. She stopped at the edge of the table. Up close, Damien Volkov was even harder to read. His face was sharp, defined jaw, dark eyes that didn't give anything away. A mouth that looked like it had decided years ago to stop smiling unless there was a reason. He wasn't classically handsome in the way that asked to be admired. He was handsome in the way that made you careful. The kind of face that had seen things and filed them away and moved on. "Good evening," Nora said. Her voice came out exactly as she intended. Calm, professional, warm without being soft. "My name is Nora. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with still or sparkling?" He looked at her the way people looked at things they were deciding whether to trust. Not with suspicion, with assessment. There was a difference. "Still," he said. His voice was low. Eastern European undertone, worn smooth by years in the city but not gone. "Of course." She poured without spilling. Without rushing. "The kitchen is featuring a dry-aged ribeye this evening, and Chef Benoit has prepared a saffron risotto that I'd personally recommend. Shall I give you a moment? You can stay." The words were quiet, but they landed differently than small talk. The man to his right shifted almost imperceptibly. Nora kept her expression exactly where it was. "Of course," she said again. She answered his questions, 2 of them brief about the wine selection, and then retreated to the service station without looking back. She set the order pad down and let out a slow breath through her nose. Across the room, the piano kept playing. Glasses kept clinking. The room kept performing. But something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet. It was a feeling, the kind that lived below the surface of thought. The instinct that had once told her to take the back stairwell instead of the elevator in her old apartment building, and she'd later found out why. Her mother used to call it her radar. Sharp as a blade and twice as quiet. She scanned the room again, unhurried, the way she'd learned to. Not looking, observing. The man by the window was wrong. He was seated near the far glass panel, 2 tables from Damien's position, and he hadn't touched his food in 11 minutes. That wasn't unusual on its own. People got distracted, people took calls. But he wasn't on his phone. He wasn't talking to the woman across from him. He was watching the reflection in the glass. Not the street below. The reflection. Nora turned slightly, adjusting the placement of a water glass that didn't need adjusting, and tracked his line of sight. He was using the glass like a mirror, angling his view across the room without turning his head. His right hand rested on the table, but his fingers were too still. His left hand was below the table's edge, and he kept checking his watch. 3 times in 4 minutes. Not the casual glance of someone with a reservation or a meeting, the tight, compulsive check of someone counting down. Nora set the glass down and straightened slowly. Then she saw the second one. Near the glass panel on the left side of the room, a man she had taken for a lone diner was positioned with a perfect sight line to the center of Damien's table. He hadn't ordered a main course. He was nursing the same glass of water she'd seen him pour himself 40 minutes ago. His chair was angled slightly outward, not toward the room. Toward the window. Toward the street outside. The pieces landed in her mind one at a time, each one heavier than the last. The angle of the chair. The reflection watching. The countdown on the watch. The untouched food. The precise positioning near the glass panels that ran floor to ceiling along the restaurant's outer wall. The same glass panels that turned every diner into a silhouette from the building across the street. From the right position, the right floor, the right window, the right equipment. Those panels weren't just glass. They were a frame. She was already moving back toward table 4, her pulse even, her face giving away nothing, her mind running through angles and distances with the cold, practiced clarity of a woman who had grown up in rooms where the math of survival mattered. She was 3 feet from the table when she saw it. A faint point of light. Red. Barely visible against the warm glow of the room's lighting. The kind of thing you wouldn't catch unless you were already looking at the right spot. It appeared on the white tablecloth first, steady and precise, and then it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Up the edge of Damien's jacket. Across his chest. Settling. Nora didn't think. Thinking was slower than knowing, and she already knew. She dropped the tray. The sound of it hitting the marble was loud enough to turn heads. Crystal stemware shattering, silver scattering across the floor. And in the half-second of noise and distraction she lunged forward. Both hands hitting Damien's shoulders with everything she had, driving him sideways and down out of his chair just as the window behind him exploded. The sound came a fraction of a second later. A sharp, violent crack of glass, a shriek from somewhere across the room, a chair overturning. The shot hit the back of the leather seat where Damien had been sitting a moment before and buried itself in the wall. Then everything broke. Screaming. Tables overturning. The security team was moving. 2 of them drawing weapons, one hauling Damien upright even as he was already rising on his own, already scanning the room with eyes that had gone completely flat and cold. People were scrambling for exits, for cover, for each other. The piano stopped mid-note. Nora was on the floor. Her left palm was bleeding, a piece of shattered glass from the tray. She registered it the way she registered most pain. Noted, filed, set aside. She pushed herself to one knee. 2 hands grabbed her arms from behind and hauled her upright. Hard. Don't move. The man's grip was iron. Damien's security, the one who had been near the kitchen. His face was in hers, jaw tight, eyes assessing. Who are you working for? Let her go. The voice was quiet. Quiet the way deep water was quiet. Not because nothing was there, but because everything was below the surface. The grip on Nora's arms released instantly. Damien stood 3 feet away. His suit jacket had a thin line of glass dust across the left shoulder. His hair was slightly displaced. Otherwise he looked exactly as he had when he'd walked in, composed, contained, and more dangerous than anything else in the room. He was looking at Nora with that same assessing quality from earlier, except now there was something sharper underneath it. She moved before the shot, he said. It wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the man who had been holding her, but his eyes stayed on Nora. She saw it first. Nora stood still and let him look. She understood what was happening. He was deciding something. And she understood, in the particular way she understood most things about dangerous men in expensive rooms, that the decision he was making right now would shape every minute that followed. There were 2 of them, she said. Her voice was steady. One at the south table using the window glass as a mirror. One positioned near the left panel with a direct sight line to your seat. The shot came from the building across the street, 3rd or 4th floor, based on the angle of impact. She paused. Whoever planned this knew your table assignment in advance. They coordinated 2 inside contacts with an external shooter. That's not improvised. That's infrastructure. The room had gone almost completely silent except for the sound of someone crying softly near the far wall and the distant wail of sirens beginning to build outside. Damien's security team had formed a perimeter without being told. 2 of them were already on phones. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then something moved across his face, not warmth, not gratitude, not surprise. Something more complicated than any of those. Something that looked like recognition. Your hand, he said. Nora looked down. The cut on her palm was bleeding more than she'd registered. It's fine. It's not. He nodded to someone behind her. Get it seen too. Then to her directly, you're coming with us. It wasn't a question. She knew that. She also knew that no was not an available option. Not because he would force her, but because every instinct she had was telling her that whatever had just tried to happen in this room was not finished. Whoever had sent that shot had inside help. And inside help meant that the people who had watched this fail were already planning the next move. She wrapped her bleeding hand in a linen napkin and followed him out. The next 6 hours were controlled chaos. Nora sat in the back seat of a black SUV that smelled like leather and gun oil and moved through Chicago's streets with a kind of deliberate calm that suggested the driver had made this exact run before. Damien sat beside her, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low and rapid Russian. She didn't speak Russian. He didn't need to. The cadence told her enough. He was coordinating, not panicking. He was giving orders, not asking questions. Whatever was breaking around him, he was the thing at the center of it that didn't break. She watched the city blur past the tinted window and kept her breathing even. They ended up somewhere on the north side. A building that looked like an ordinary commercial property from the outside and was very clearly not. The lobby was staffed by men who wore suits the way other men wore armor, and the elevator required a key card that Damien produced without looking for it. They went up 4 floors. The room they brought her to was large, sparse, and clean. Not a cell. She clocked the exits immediately, counted them, noted the cameras. A room meant for waiting, but with enough respect for the person doing the waiting that it didn't feel like confinement. There was a first aid kit on the table. She used it. She was wrapping her hand when the door opened and Damien walked in alone. He had shed the jacket. The shirt underneath was white, the sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked slightly more like a person and slightly less like a statement. He sat down across from her and set a glass of water on the table in her direction without ceremony. Walk me through it again, he said. From the beginning. So she did. She laid it out the way she'd learned to lay things out. Clean, sequential, no editorializing. The man with the watch. The reflection technique. The positioning of the second inside contact. The angle of the shot, which told her the shooter had been elevated and across the street, which told her the sniper had needed precise foreknowledge of Damien's seat to set up that shot in advance. She told him about the timing. The way the inside contact had been checking his watch suggested a pre-agreed signal window, which meant communication had happened recently, which meant the leak was active and ongoing. When she finished, Damien was quiet for a moment. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't an accusation. I've been in rooms where survival required paying attention, she said. I learned to pay attention. Where? She met his eyes. Does it matter? He looked at her. That same quality, assessing, patient, unhurried. No, he said. It doesn't. Something shifted between them then. Not warmth, they weren't there yet. But a kind of acknowledgement. The recognition that passed between two people who had both learned in different ways that the world was a place that required vigilance to navigate. He stood. You'll stay here tonight. You're a witness and a target. That's not a debate. I'm aware, Nora said. There's a leak in your operation. Whoever helped set up that shot knows your schedule, your table preferences, and has at least 2 people inside your circles with enough access to coordinate a 2-point surveillance setup in a room you use regularly. She paused. You don't just have a shooter problem. You have a trust problem. Damien stopped at the door. His back was to her. For a moment he was perfectly still, and she could see, in the set of his shoulders and the particular quality of his stillness, that she had said something that landed differently than he'd expected. He turned his head slightly. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk more tomorrow. He left. The door didn't lock behind him. She noted that too. The days that followed had a texture she hadn't expected. She had anticipated either interrogation or indifference. He got neither. What she got instead was access, guarded, measured, but real. She was given a room in the building's upper floor, a phone that could make outgoing calls, and meals that were better than anything she'd eaten in months. She was not asked to stay. She was also not told she could leave. The implicit understanding was that she remained because the situation required it, and because she was smart enough to know that whatever was hunting Damien had now seen her face. She used the time to watch. She watched the security team's rotation patterns. She watched the way information moved through the building. Who talked to whom, who looked at their phones when certain conversations happened near them, who left the room during briefings and came back too quickly. She mapped the rhythms of the operation with the same quiet attention she'd used on the restaurant floor, and what she found was not reassuring. On the 3rd day she asked for a meeting. The man who came to collect her was broad-shouldered and watchful and clearly not pleased to be collecting her. His name was Kroll. She'd heard others use it. He had the look of someone who had been loyal for a long time and found the concept of a waitress in a security briefing personally offensive. Damien was in a room on the 2nd floor that was clearly his working space. A long table covered in maps and documents, 2 monitors running split-screen surveillance feeds, a whiteboard with notations she recognized as movement tracking. He was on the phone when she entered and finished the call without rushing, which she'd already learned was his default mode. You wanted to talk, he said. Your security patterns are predictable, she said. Not all of them, but enough. Whoever is feeding information out of your organization doesn't need to pass along everything. They just need to pass along the points where your movement is fixed. Your dinner location was fixed. Your table preference is fixed. Your arrival window last Tuesday had less than a 12-minute variance over the past month. She set a single sheet of paper on the table. She'd written it by hand, 3 columns. These are the fixed points I identified in 3 days. Whoever is inside your organization has had weeks. Damien looked at the paper. He didn't touch it immediately. His eyes moved over it with the careful focus of someone who was reading for comprehension, not performance. Kroll, he said without looking up. The man near the door made a sound that was not quite an objection. She's right, Damien said. This has been sitting in front of us. He looked up at Nora. What else? 3 of your team members show behavioral inconsistencies during briefings. Not all 3 are leaking, but the inconsistencies suggest at least one of them has been managing anxiety for longer than this week. The other 2 may simply have bad tells. She paused. And whoever planned the restaurant operation wasn't acting alone. This is coordinated. There's someone above the insider. Someone with strategic patience and resources. This wasn't a spontaneous play. This was a campaign. She watched Damien process this. There was something about the way he handled information that she found, despite every rational reason to maintain clinical distance, quietly compelling. He didn't perform thinking. He just did it. He didn't fill silence with noise. He let the silence be what it was. I want you on this, he said. I'm already on it. Officially. He held her gaze. Chief Security Advisor. You restructure the protocols. You identify the insider. You report directly to me. The room went very still. Kroll's jaw tightened. Two other men near the monitors exchanged a look that was the professional equivalent of shouting. She's a waitress, Kroll said. The word carried a weight that was meant to be crushing. She was a waitress, Damien said. 2 weeks ago she saved my life in a room full of people who were paid to do exactly that and didn't. He looked at Kroll with the patient, final quality of a man who had made decisions in harder rooms than this one. She's taking the role. Are we going to waste more time, or are we going to find who's trying to put me in the ground? Kroll looked at Nora. She looked back. Welcome to the team, he said, and the words tasted like vinegar in his mouth. Nora didn't smile. He got to work. The first thing she did was eliminate predictability. She redesigned the movement protocols from the ground up. No fixed schedules, no repeated routes, no advanced disclosure of locations beyond a need-to-know window of 2 hours. She compartmentalized the information channels so that no single person had the full picture of Damien's whereabouts at any given time. She introduced a system of deliberate microvariations, small random changes in timing and routing that would be invisible to someone watching from the outside but would make it impossible for an insider to pass reliable advance intelligence. The team hated it. She expected that. Change in operations like this was always resisted, not because people were disloyal, but because predictability was comfortable and comfort masqueraded as safety. She didn't argue. She implemented. Damien gave her everything she needed to implement it. That was the part she hadn't fully anticipated. Not the access but the absence of interference. He overrode objections without drama. He enforced her directives with a word. He didn't explain himself to his team, which meant she didn't have to explain herself either. She operated under the cover of his authority, and she was self-aware enough to recognize both the utility and the complexity of that arrangement. The evenings were different from the days. The days were operational, briefings, analysis, the slow, methodical work of building a behavioral map of everyone in the organization's inner circle. The evenings had a different quality. Damien worked late, and somewhere around 9 or 10 o'clock the building quieted, the team thinned out, and the space between formal and informal blurred. He would come to the workroom where she set up her analysis. He would pour 2 glasses of something from the cabinet in the corner, not always the same thing, and set one near her without asking whether she wanted it. He always drank it. They would go over the day's data and then sometimes they would not talk about the data at all. You grew up in Chicago? He asked one night, not looking up from the report he was reading. Close to it, she said. South Side, technically. She paused. You. Moscow. Think if. Then here. A brief pause. Chicago suited me. Because. He considered the question. She'd noticed he didn't answer quickly unless he was certain. Because it doesn't apologize for what it is, he said. She understood that. She'd always understood that about the city. It was honest in the way that hard things were honest. Not gentle but real. How long were you a waitress? He asked. 2 years at Aurelius. Before that, other places. She turned a page. It's good work if you want to stay invisible and still be in the room. He looked up at that. Just for a moment. You wanted to be in the room. I always want to be in the room, she said. I just don't always need people to know it. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. A kind of recognition, private and unannounced. Get some sleep, he said. We have the Harrington event tomorrow. She nodded. But neither of them moved for another 20 minutes. The Harrington event was a fundraiser held in a glass and steel tower downtown. The kind of gathering where the city's money and the city's power moved through the same room and pretended to be different things. Nora had been to events like this before in previous lives. She knew the choreography. She attended as part of Damien's entourage, dressed in a black gown that one of his people had produced without comment, her hair pulled back, her expression set to the particular frequency of polished neutrality that let her blend into rooms like this without disappearing from them. She was not introduced as his security advisor. She was not introduced at all. That suited her. She worked the room the way she'd worked every room since she was old enough to understand what working a room meant. Not circulating, not performing, but observing. She stood near the windows with a glass she barely touched, and she watched. She watched who spoke to whom and for how long. She watched who looked at Damien when he wasn't looking at them. She watched which conversations stopped when certain people approached and which ones continued without a break. She catalogued it all, layer by layer, the way you catalogued a painting. Not color by color, but the whole image, the composition, where the weight fell and where the light was. Damien found her near the east windows at 40 minutes into the event. He came to stand beside her, facing the room, not her. It was a practiced positioning, conversational but secure, both of them with full sight lines to the space. He held a glass of water. "The man in the gray suit by the bar," she said quietly, "has been watching your position since you entered. He's been to this event 3 years running, according to the host's aide I spoke to 20 minutes ago. He never introduces himself to the main table. He doesn't need anything from these people socially." She paused. "He's here to observe. Same reason I am. You think he's connected to this? I think he's worth knowing. I don't know if he's connected. Those are different conclusions." Damien glanced in the direction she'd indicated. Brief, controlled. "His name is Brennan. He runs logistics for Harrington's secondary business interests. Those. Which are not the kind of interests that appear in Harrington's annual report." "Then he has channels," she said. "And if he has channels, he has access to the kind of money that funds patient campaigns." They were quiet for a moment. Below them, the city moved through its night. All that light in motion, indifferent and continuous. "You're good at this," he said. It wasn't flattery. It was the same direct, unornamented quality he brought to everything. A statement of fact delivered simply. Nora felt it land somewhere she hadn't entirely prepared for. "I know," she said. And then, because she was honest in the way that hard things were honest, "So are you." He turned his head slightly. In the ambient light of the event, his profile was sharp, unguarded in the way faces were when they weren't being watched. She had the sudden, inconvenient awareness that she had been watching him for long enough to know what his guarded face looked like and what his unguarded face looked like, and that they were very different things, and that only one of them appeared when the two of them were alone. He looked back at the room. "We should circulate," he said. "Yes," she agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. The second attack came on a Thursday. She had implemented the new protocols for 9 days. She had almost let herself believe that the friction she'd introduced into the system had bought them enough time to find the insider before the next move. Almost. It was a transit situation. A brief, supposedly unannounced movement between two locations that had been routed through the new compartmentalized system. The route had been disclosed to 4 people within the 2-hour window. Only 4. They were 2 blocks from the destination when the vehicle ahead of them slowed without signaling. Nora registered it from the back seat in the same way she registered everything. Quietly, instantly, and with the particular weight of something wrong. "Change the route," she said. The driver hesitated. 1 second. Nora didn't have 1 second. "Change it now," she said, sharper. The driver pulled a hard left. As they cleared the intersection, the vehicle that had been ahead of them stopped fully and 2 men exited the far side in a way that was not consistent with a car breakdown. From the side street they'd taken, Nora watched the follow-through of what would have been a close-range intercept attempt collapse in real time as the target it was designed around simply wasn't there. In the back seat, Damien was completely still. He looked at her. "The route was in the 2-hour window system," she said. Her voice was flat. 4 people had access. 3 of them are in this vehicle. He didn't say anything. He understood the math the same way she did. One of the 4 people who had known the route had passed it forward. And now Nora knew something she hadn't known before. The insider had a response window of less than 2 hours. Which meant they were communicating in near real time. which meant they were either using a device no one had found or they were close enough to the operation that their communication didn't look like communication at all. "I know how to find them," she said. He called 3 different versions of an upcoming event. Separate routes, separate timing windows, separate details, and feed each version through a different information channel. Only one version would be real. The other 2 would be ghosts, constructed with enough specific detail to be credible but rerouted at the last moment through a protocol only she and Damien held. If the insider passed information forward, they would pass one of the ghost versions. When the response team showed up for a ghost, the ghost would tell her exactly which channel had leaked. Damien had listened to the plan without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You're using me as bait." "I'm using the idea of you," she said. "You won't be anywhere near the ghost locations." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she had come to recognize over the past weeks. Not agreement, exactly, but a particular quality of trust that was more precise than agreement. Agreement could be conditional. What she saw in him was something more deliberate. The decision to believe that she had thought this through, arrived at from evidence rather than hope. "Set it up," he said. She did. It took 4 days to build the 3 versions cleanly enough to be credible. She seeded them through different channels, timed the disclosure windows carefully, and then she watched. On the 3rd day she got her answer. The response team, external hired, not Damien's people, showed up at the ghost location. The second ghost had never been activated. The first ghost had been fed through only one channel to only one person. Nora walked into Damien's office with the name and set a single page on his desk. He read it once. Something moved across his face. Fast, controlled, gone in under 2 seconds. She didn't look away from it. She had wondered, in the abstract way she allowed herself to wonder about such things, how he would receive this particular name. Now she knew. Cost him something. He didn't show how much. "How certain are you?" he asked. "Quiet." "Completely," she said. The channel was singular. The timing matches the 2-hour response window from the second attack. And when I cross-referenced the behavioral data from the briefings, she pointed to the lower section of the page, the anxiety patterns spiked consistently after any discussion of moving locations. He knew those conversations mattered. Damien was still for a moment. Then he stood. "Leave the room," he said. Not unkindly, but absolutely. She left. What followed happened the way these things happened in Damien's world. Efficiently, completely, without drama. The man named on that single page was a senior figure in Damien's organization. He had been there for 8 years. He had attended Damien's mother's funeral. He had given a toast at a dinner honoring the anniversary of the operation's founding. He had been, by every visible measure, a cornerstone. He had also, for the past 11 months, been working with an external faction that wanted Damien removed and replaced with a leadership structure more amenable to a merger neither Damien nor anyone else in his inner circle had been consulted on. The motivation was not ideology. It was not grievance. It was simply the oldest motive in any organization: power and the belief that it should belong to someone else. The confrontation was short. The confession, from what Nora was told afterward, was not. The external network that had funded and coordinated the campaign was dismantled over the next 48 hours with a precision that reflected the quality of the intelligence Nora had spent weeks building. Routes, contacts, financial channels, communication infrastructure. It collapsed the way things collapsed when the architecture underneath them was removed cleanly. The threat was over. Nora sat in the workroom on the night it ended and looked at the whiteboard full of her own notations. The behavioral maps, the access charts, the channel diagrams, and felt the particular stillness that came after a long sprint. Not relief exactly. Something more like completion. The way a room felt after furniture had been moved back into its correct position. She heard the door and knew it was him before she turned. Damien closed the door behind him. He wasn't wearing a jacket. He had 2 glasses and he set one near her the way he always did, without asking, without ceremony. He sat down across from her, not at the head of the table where he usually worked, but on the same side, the corner between them occupied by the low hum of the monitors they hadn't turned off. He looked tired in the way she'd never seen him look tired before. Not diminished, he wasn't capable of diminished, she thought. But worn. Like a blade that had been used hard and needed a night of rest before it was sharp again. They sat in silence for a while. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, that had, over the preceding weeks, become its own form of language between them. He was with me for 8 years, Damien said. Not a complaint. Just a fact being processed. I know, she said. That kind of time. He stopped. He turned the glass slowly in his hands. You assume it means something. It means something, she said carefully. It means he made a choice after all of that. Which is worse than if he had never been loyal at all. She paused. But it also means 8 years were real. Both things are true. He looked at her. In the low light of the workroom, with the city glowing through the narrow windows and the whiteboard behind them full of the evidence of what she had built and what it had found, his expression was more open than she had ever seen it. Not raw. Damien Volkov was not a man who was ever raw. But unguarded. The way faces were when they had stopped deciding how to look. You changed things, he said. Not just the protocols. The entire shape of how this works. He held her gaze. I've worked with people for a long time, Nora. Good people. Experienced people. Nobody thinks the way you think. She didn't deflect it. She had learned not to deflect the things he said directly. I've had practice, she said. Different rooms. Same principles. Where did you go? He asked. Before the restaurant? She had been expecting this question for weeks. She had also, somewhere in the process of the last several weeks, stopped dreading it. I was in a system, she said. State. Then some places that weren't state. Then I made my own arrangements. She kept her voice level. I learned early that nobody was coming to pay attention on my behalf. So I paid attention myself. He was quiet for a moment. How old were you? When I started paying attention? A brief pause. 7. Something in his expression shifted. It was not pity, she would have closed down immediately at pity. It was something else. The recognition of a particular kind of formation. The kind that happened when the world took something from you early and you rebuilt yourself around the absence. He recognized it because he carried a version of it himself. She had known that for weeks. I grew up understanding that survival required specific skills, he said. Observation. Patience. The willingness to make decisions that couldn't be unmade. He looked at the table. I built everything from that. I don't regret it. But I have spent a long time in rooms where trust was a calculation and nothing else. And now, she asked. He looked up. His eyes in the low light were very dark and very direct. And now I have sat in this room with you for weeks and watched you dismantle something that was hiding inside my operation that I had missed entirely. I have watched you think in ways that I respect more than I can usefully account for. I have watched you be calm in situations where calm was not the obvious response. He paused. And I have noticed on more evenings than I intended to notice, that I am not in a hurry to end the conversation. Nora held his gaze. Her heart was doing something she had not given it permission to do. Not racing exactly, but present in a way it usually wasn't. A low, steady insistence. Damien, she said. I know, he said. I'm aware of the complications. He didn't look away. I'm aware that this is not a simple situation and that what I am asking, if I am asking, is not a simple thing. I don't have a clean version of this to offer you. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. Something underneath it was the closest thing to uncertain she had ever heard from him. I'm not asking for something easy. I'm asking if you want what is real. The room held the question. Nora thought about the life she'd been building before the red dot. The careful, contained, self-sufficient life with its small apartment and its good work shifts and its deliberate absence of anything that required her to be known. She had built that life on purpose. It had been wise and it had been safe and it had been, she could admit now in the particular honesty of this specific room and this specific night, very lonely. She thought about the 7-year-old who had learned to pay attention because no one else was going to. She thought about the last 4 weeks. The late nights and the long silences and the thing that passed between them in the spaces between strategy and everything else. The way he handed her a glass without asking. The way she knew his face when it was unguarded. The way the silence had stopped being silence and started being something else entirely. She didn't answer immediately. He had asked her not to give him easy. She wouldn't. But she looked at him. Really looked at him in the way she rarely allowed herself to look at anything she wanted. And she felt the particular weight of a door that was standing open rather than closed. She didn't walk through it. But she didn't walk away from it either. Ask me again, she said quietly, when I've had a night of actual sleep and you've had one too. Something moved across his face. Not disappointment. The opposite of disappointment. The quiet, controlled relief of a man who had offered something real and had it received with the same seriousness with which it was given. He exhaled slowly. He picked up his glass. Tomorrow then, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. The city glowed through the narrow windows. The monitors hummed. The whiteboard full of her notations stood behind them like the record of something survived. And in the workroom that had become, over the past several weeks, the most honest room either of them had been in for a very long time, Nora Russo and Damien Volkov sat together in the particular silence that existed after danger had passed and before whatever came next had begun. It was not resolution. It was not arrival. It was the space between, uncertain and full of possibility in equal measure, built not on the easy thing but on the truest one, that they had seen each other clearly in the worst light under the worst pressure and had not looked away. And sometimes that was exactly where something real decided to begin. Hope you enjoyed the story. Learn me know your thought in the comments. Thank you for watching.